Hello, I'm Terrence McNally. Welcome to Freeforum, a world that just might work. I'm going to be speaking today with economist Robert POLLIN and Dave Campbell, Secretary-Treasurer of United Steelworkers Local 675 in Los Angeles County, about the California Climate Jobs Plan, initiated and paid for by labor unions, written by POLLIN and others. It creates 1 million new jobs through 2030 while pursuing the state's clean energy goals. And you can learn more at CaliforniaClimateJobsPlan.com. That's all one word, CaliforniaClimateJobsPlan.com. The show airs as specials on KPFK 90.7 in LA and streams weekly on the Progressive Voices Network on TuneIn. Podcasts are available anytime, anywhere on Apple Podcasts, Podomatic.com, Google Play, most major podcast sites, and at my site, terrencemcnally.net, TERRENCEMCNALLY.net. Now to today's conversation. As you may well have heard, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, the United Nations Climate Science Research Group, recently released its latest major report. In the 8 years since the last comprehensive IPCC report, and the 6 years since the Paris Accords, humanity's output of heat-trapping gases has only grown. Even with the dip in emissions stemming from the COVID-19 pandemic, carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere reached a record high this year, topping 419 parts per million. 6 key takeaways from the IPCC report. 1. The IPCC stated that it is unequivocal. Humans are warming the planet. 2. Present-day global concentrations of atmospheric carbon dioxide, CO2, are higher and rising faster than at any time in at least the past 2 million years. About 85% of CO2 emissions are from burning fossil fuels. The remaining 15% are generated from land use change, such as deforestation and degradation. Takeaway number 3, extreme weather is on the rise. Fires, intense hurricanes, floods, etc. Heat waves, droughts, and fire weather happening at the same time are now more frequent. These compound events have been seen in Australia, Southern Europe, Northern Eurasia, parts of the Americas, and Africa's tropical forests. 4. Our oceans are getting hotter, higher, and more acidic. Oceans absorb 91% of the energy from the increased atmospheric greenhouse gases, and this has led to ocean warming and more marine heat waves, particularly over the past 15 years. Ocean acidification caused by the uptake of CO2 has occurred in the overall oceans and is reaching depths beyond 2,000 meters in the Southern Ocean and the North Atlantic. Takeaway number 5, many changes are already irreversible. The IPCC says that if the Earth's climate was stabilized soon, some climate change-induced damage could not be reversed within centuries or even millennia. Globally, glaciers have been synchronously retreating since 1950 and are projected to continue to melt for decades after the global temperature is stabilized. Meanwhile, the acidification of the deep ocean will remain for thousands of years after CO2 emissions cease. And finally, takeaway number 6, we can still act to prevent the worst-case scenario. According to Maisa Rojas Corradi, an IPCC author, however, unless there are immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions of all greenhouse gases, limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees will be beyond reach. So conditions are not yet hopeless, but we've got our marching orders. Now you want some good news? In mid-June, I saw this headline in the LA Times: Why Oil Worker Unions Back Clean Energy. Reporter Sammy Roth writes, it's worth slowing down to examine a groundbreaking new report endorsed by 19 unions, including 2 representing thousands of California oil workers, that offers a preview of what the path forward might look like. A couple of highlights. The report estimates the Golden State could create 418,000 clean energy jobs a year through a program to cut climate pollution in half over the next decade. It could create even more jobs, 626,000 a year, through investments in related areas such as water, infrastructure, public parks and roadways, as well as fixing leaky gas pipelines. The report's lead author, Robert POLLIN, and his collaborators calculated the price tag of creating more than a million jobs at 138 billion annually, which sounds like a lot until you realize that's not even 4% of California's expected GDP. An even more encouraging number, after accounting for retirements that would have happened anyway, the report estimates the cost of providing an equitable transition to fossil fuel workers who would lose their jobs comes to $470 million a year. That's just 0.02% of expected California GDP. Roth adds what really stands out is the role of organized labor in seeking out and paying for the research, particularly Local 675 of the United Steelworkers. Local 675 represents 4,500 workers, about two-thirds of whom have jobs in oil refining and extraction in LA County. The union's members staff a Chevron refinery, as well as refineries owned by Marathon Petroleum, PBF Energy, and Phillips 66. They also work the Wilmington oil field for California Resources Corporation. So what's going on exactly? Roth quotes Dave Campbell, Secretary-Treasurer of Local 675. An energy transition is coming whether we like it or not, and it's crucial that we build a secure future for workers and their families. And his board kicked in money to help fund the POLLIN report and voted unanimously to endorse its conclusions. The 19 unions that have endorsed the report have been discussing energy transition issues in California for more than a year and reached out to POLLIN after seeing similar research he'd done in other states. And I'm excited to have as my guests today Robert Pollin and Dave Campbell. Robert Pollin is Distinguished University Professor of Economics and co-director of the Political Economy Research Institute, PERI, at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. His several books include The Living Wage, co-authored with Stephanie Luce, Back to Full Employment, Greening the Global Economy, and The Climate Crisis and the Global Green New Deal, co-authored with Noam Chomsky and C.J. Policronio. He's also authored and co-authored a number of reports aimed at moving things forward in the real world, from creating living wage statutes to the economics of Medicare for all, and including the California Climate Jobs Plan. Dave Campbell, who studied chemistry at University of Massachusetts Amherst, has served for over a quarter century as Secretary-Treasurer, United Steelworkers Local 675, and recently stepped down after a quarter century as Vice President, LA County Federation of Labor, AFL-CIO. Welcome, Robert Pollin and Dave Campbell, to Freeforum, a world that just might work. Let me tell listeners we're recording this conversation Wednesday, August 25th. I make a point on this show of letting listeners get a feel for the people behind the work and ideas that we talk about. So, again, I'll go to both of you, and I'll go Robert first, then Dave. How do you each see your path to the work you do these days? And you can go way back, mentors, turning points, pivot points, moments of decision. So, Robert first.
I don't know how far back I should go, but let me just talk about the work I've been doing on building a green economy, Green New Deal that is also an just, equitable economy, a more egalitarian economy. The idea for that work really struck me. I used to teach at UC Riverside, and I was living in Riverside, California for a long time. And the prevailing view around climate change was that you could control climate change, but to do so entailed sacrificing economic growth and jobs. And that premise, which still remains powerful in a lot of discussions, is something that actually didn't make sense to me right from the get-go because if we talk about, for example, military spending, people talk about military spending in terms of military objectives, or you could say imperialist objectives, or whatever we have. But we also talk about the military budget as a great source of job creation. And that's why there are U.S. military operations in every single congressional district in the United States, because every congressperson wants to have a piece of the action. Now, when I thought about a transition to a green economy and a climate stabilization program, I saw it as a comparable kind of investment project that would generate, it would entail transforming our energy system. And that act of transformation is also an act of building, an act of creation, an act of opening opportunities. So, really, that was how I got into this research. And it was very much in, in dialogue with people who were involved in the labor movement. And so I'm thrilled to be connected now with labor leaders in California, in particular, somebody like Dave Campbell, who's been a great labor leader for a long time.
You know, I have to tell you, Robert, when I read that article and thought about doing an interview, the first thing I wrote down was sell this like defense spending.
There you go.
that I mean, for one thing, retrofitting. Just to take one little thing, retrofitting is by definition local. There's so much that can be spread around, and it was. I mean, to hear you say that, I got this big smile on my face. I said, well, you know, that it was part almost of the germ of how you saw the possibility.
It was the germ, yeah. Because actually, I've been doing economics for a long time, 4 decades basically, but I have not been an environmental economist per se. That's not really was the basis. I was more involved in issues around macroeconomics, government spending, jobs, inflation, that kind of thing, and then also labor markets, and then financial crises, financial instability, and then economic development. And, I did work in Africa with the United Nations, all of that stuff. So I really was very peripheral to debates around what we do about climate change until I thought of this idea. And then I said, well, this is a whole different way to think about it. And it's also a way through which we can overcome the animosity that people, workers, labor movement, have felt towards environmental movements, because with some justification, these things, the environmental laws, regulations, become a threat to job opportunity. And so I wanted to reshape the approach so that expanding job opportunities, defending the rights of workers, expanding worker opportunity is part of and integrated with this climate stabilization project, which is essential to sustaining life on Earth.
Yep, excellent, excellent. Dave, a bit about your path, perhaps how you got involved with unions, how how you, and I know that when I spoke with you offline, you mentioned an inspiration of yours, Tony Mizaki. Anything you want to say about how you got involved and how this is the kind of work you're doing these days?
Well, I got involved because I care about my coworkers and taught by my parents, I guess, to speak up when things were wrong, and became a shop steward because of that, and rose to the highest level in my local union, 6 years now. The early days, I met a gentleman in that process, was a leader of the oil, chemical, atomic workers, which I was then in. The steelworkers today is comprised of many manufacturing sector unions which no longer exist. They became too small as their jobs were exported in the world market, and eventually many of them got rolled into workers. But Tony was a unique individual.
Um, yeah, we are having some issues with the audio distortion there. I'm hoping that it'll still come across. So let's talk about the California Climate Jobs Plan. How did this initiative originate? I know that. Let me just. I know that Robert, you've done some work for other states. You've been. This is not your first such report, and so I'm curious who approached who first.
Yeah. So, right, I did two in 2017, the first two state level reports, one for New York and one for the state of Washington. Um, and so then, following from that, I did one for Colorado, and that was sponsored by the AFL-CIO leadership, as was the one in Washington State. So really, it just kind of caught on. I've also done them for Maine, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia, in addition to California. So, I had been doing things both at the national level and more for other countries and global level. So it just was a natural fit. In addition to the fact that there were, I have good relations with people in the labor movement, including the then president of the AFL-CIO in the state of Washington, Jeff Johnson, another great labor leader, along with Dave. So Jeff really was the one that got me going doing the state level studies, and so, these these discussions kind of move from one place to another, and of course, I'm open to it. I want to be able to do my small bit to advance climate stabilization as well as economic and social justice. And this is the one of the ways, hopefully, I can make a small dent, moving things in the right direction.
Well, as we've already talked about, this notion of shifting sort of the default position that has for so long been inaccurate but prevalent, which is that doing good by the climate, doing good by the environment would cost us jobs. One of the ways that I think about it is jobs are usually generated when there's a significant change in the way something is produced or delivered. And these investments, these actions, these technologies have been stalled by opposition to the shift they represent. And when a new way of doing things comes along, it creates new jobs. Now, what's key to what we're talking about here is that people can also get hurt, the ones who lose those jobs. That are replaced by those new jobs. But as long as if that is paramount and a high priority in the way your whole approach happens, then this seems like it's a winner. But it seems to me when you're doing these reports, you're saying, look, here are the numbers. Look, here's the evidence. The other is a stereotype or a myth or a belief. But here's the numbers. Look at them.
Hmm. Well, one of the things you said, which I want to emphasize more, which is critical, is that there will be jobs lost as well as the jobs created through building a new economy, and there will be jobs lost through winding down the fossil fuel economy. And so the work that I've done has tried to consider both as carefully as possible, and to do that in a way that is fully respectful of the workers, their families, their communities that are facing difficulties, that are facing displacement. And so, a big part of all of the studies I've done everywhere, in every state, in every country, is the what we can call the just transition, or some people don't like that term, call it another term if you like, a fair transition for the workers and communities that will be negatively impacted. And there are, as you mentioned at the outset, what we show is that there are ways to do this that are it's real money. $460 million a year is not peanuts at one level, but it is peanuts compared to the overall GDP of California, where it's less than 0.02% of the state GDP. So that issue of transition is integral, essential to the work we've done. And that's why I've, really been inspired by the fact that our study was endorsed in California by 20 labor unions, and in particular by Dave's union, the oil refinery workers, because that shows some real courage by the union leadership, such as Dave, who recognize that the fossil fuel industry must wind down if we are going to have any sustainable future, and that therefore the solution is not to oppose a green transition, but to do it in such a way that puts the well-being of the displaced workers front and center. that's what we've tried to do, and that's the work that people like Dave have been really providing leadership around for a long time.
Dave, I believe that I read it's been initiated and paid for by labor unions. And Robert, you said that had happened in some of the other states as well. How did that decision get made? How did that sense of initiative, and it seems to me, given what Robert was just saying, to get out in front of the issue, to not fight it, but to get in front of it?
Well, in California, there had been, you know, the um, the legislature in California has been concerned about this issue for quite some time. Several years ago, they passed a bill called AB 32,
Mm-hmm.
and later they passed another bill which will phase out transportation fuels. Early in the pandemic, we saw what the refinery managers themselves call the collapse of customer demand.
Mm-hmm.
Our crude tanks were full. We were recycling, keeping our units on hot standby. We were recycling the product right back to the feed, doing what we call chasing tail, like we do during a startup or shutdown. And companies were leasing tankers to store crude, and it looked pretty damn grim. Um, and just a total collapse of customer demand. Um, so that was one experience we went through. Another experience is that in the past couple of years, we had one major refinery in California go down. Marathon Martinez shut down. There are at least one other that is in trouble right now. And then it was also announced that Phillips is going to convert one of their refineries to biofuel and shut down another one. So the what I had been talking to my executive board and members who attend local meetings for quite some time, people could see was coming um, to fruition. It was happening. Um, there had been a report in California by UC Berkeley Labor Center that talked about training, providing training to deal with climate change. But it was, in my view, and in the view of my international union, insufficient
Mm-hmm.
to talk about training. We needed to talk about job creation. And so we, uh, I kind of sidestepped the whole issue of is climate change real or is it not? Is it caused by man? So on and so forth. And I said, well, we need to look at this um, as we need some kind of social insurance here, because if we are not proactive in all this, we that refinery manager is going to be the last one to tell you that climate change is real and we're shutting down when he hands you that pink slip.
Right.
Um, so we need to be proactive and we need to lobby and do whatever we have to do to get the elements of what we call a disaster insurance policy for ourselves and our families and our communities. And we had had the experience, or at least I had had the experience of working in the state of Washington on the initiative that Robert POLLIN did a lot of the prior report work for. So we had experience with Dr. POLLIN in Washington, and I think also in Colorado. So we proposed to folks that we were working with, Jobs with Justice and Labor Network for Sustainability, that we need an academic study to tell the state how to do all this, because the one that existed was only about training. It wasn't
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
job provision. Um, So that was the impetus for what we did, and of course, the fantastic work of Labor Network for Sustainability and Jobs with Justice got other unions on board. I think that one thing that we have in common with the public sector unions is they see much of the public budget going up in smoke or being washed away in floods. And they look at that as, gee, that was money that we could have used to put towards our members' wages and benefits, and not to mention the fact that their members, just like mine, are the ones whose houses are burning down. And So there's a great deal of concern. I think the time was right for us to be able to unite with public sector unions and with environmental justice organizations and big green organizations and try to overcome the political hegemony of the oil industry and their allies in the state of California.
Yeah, I must say, when I saw that of the 20 unions, several were public sector, it wasn't clear to me what their motivation was, except that, you know, they're sort of usually on the side of that kind of thing. But I see what you're saying, absolutely. If climate change, the longer climate change gets worse in California, the more money that's going to go to fighting climate change that is going to be taken out of other public sector duties and opportunities, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I hadn't really seen
We
that.
have to spend a lot more money on fighting fires than we're spending on schools.
Right, exactly. Oh, so okay. So one of my next questions was going to be this notion of how did you put together the coalition so far of 20, and that's a, I think you've done that. Are you working to continue to try to grow that?
Yes, we are continuing to do that. We are planning to make proposals to the Assembly and Senate budget committees on Friday. So we're working on getting other organizations to sign on to the letter, including environmental justice and what we call big greens,
Mm-hmm.
the Sierra clubs, and so on and so forth.
My next question, actually, Dave, was going to be, what is your relationship with government? And you're saying that you're working on that, this week.
Oh, we work on that almost every day, believe me.
I'm sure, but I mean, where you'll have, here's the study, here's the unions, here's the climate experts, here's the economists, and here's the government signing on to it as well. That's the goal,
Well,
right?
well, yeah, we want the government to sign on to it. They haven't
Yeah,
yet. I mean, that's a process, but we're
sure.
building the framework, if you will, to execute the plan and building the political power to get it done.
And is any of the rescue and rebuild legislation passed federally so far, or some of the bills that are in the pipeline, could they contribute to this?
I'd have to defer to Dr. Pollin on that. I have my hands so full with the states, I'm not.
I had
But I think that Dr. Pollin is also advising the feds, and I believe that there is connection. Some of the money to do all these things we're talking about is undoubtedly going to come from the feds.
Robert.
Yeah, undoubtedly, Dave, you're right. The big question is how much, and that is still, that is an intensely debated question as of today, because we have the two bills in
Mm-hmm.
Congress, the so-called infrastructure bill at $1 trillion over 8 years, and then the I don't know what the latest name of it. It was initially called the American Jobs Plan, that is the 3.5 trillion.
Sort of the social infrastructure. one.
Yeah,
Right.
but I kind of get a little annoyed when it has devolved into calling it a social infrastructure, which I'm of course all in favor
Right.
of the measures to support elder care, child care,
Community
and
college.
community college. But the centerpiece of it initially, and should, in my very strong opinion, remain the investments around climate change, because this is something that we have to move forward on in a very serious, intensive way in order to come anywhere close to hitting the emission reduction targets set out by the Biden administration itself. Much less, you mentioned at the beginning of the show,
Right.
Terrence, the latest report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was just out 2 weeks ago, which by far is the most dire. This is the outstanding research organization gathering evidence on climate change, and they are absolutely unequivocal that we have to get to something close to a 50% cut in carbon dioxide emissions by 2030. And 2030 is only eight years and a few months away. In other words, we have to totally transform our energy system because the primary source of carbon dioxide emissions by far is burning oil, coal, and natural gas to produce energy. So the bill in Congress, it is critical. In my view, the investment funds coming out of that bill, if it were to pass intact tomorrow, um, are barely adequate
Right.
to.
Right.
They're not zero. I think we're looking at about 130 or 140 billion dollars per year over 8 years. That sounds like gigantic sums of money, but that's less than 1% of U.S. GDP. So that money, if you combine it with investments by states such as California and by the private sector, I think we can get to where I think we need to be nationally on an annual basis to transform our energy system in the range of $500 billion a year. And that was about 2%, 2.5% of overall activity in the economy. So, yes, the state has to provide as well as the federal government, and we have to enact regulations that make it extremely difficult or illegal for utilities, for businesses, for buildings to burn oil, coal, and natural gas.
Yeah. Let me tell people this is Freeform, a world that just might work. I'm Terrence McNally. I'm speaking with economist Robert POLLIN and Dave Campbell, Secretary Treasurer of United Steelworkers, Local 675 in Southern California, about the California Climate Jobs Plan. This initiated by labor unions, written by POLLIN and others, it pursues California's clean energy goals, but with an eye toward really paying attention to the jobs that will be transitioned and lost, and it will create 1 million new jobs, and then also have a fair or just transition for those whose jobs are lost. And you can learn more at California Climate Jobs Plan, all one word, CaliforniaClimateJobsPlan.com. And there's a lot of numbers. I've actually read the plan.
Oh, wow.
I did.
Yeah. Well, you are a glutton for punishment.
But I just felt, I'll immerse myself in it. But there's executive summary. There's wonderful graphics and so on. This is, to me, I mean, it's why I reached out to you both. This to me is one of the most exciting things I've seen, because it's not original to say that one of the drags on our progress toward dealing with climate change, or all along the way dealing with pollution and those sorts of things, is that the financial and political power of, let me call them, old industries, entrenched industries, industries that, because of their value to society and their role in society, have accumulated an enormous amount of wealth and political power. And they can slow down any sort of transition, and we can't afford it anymore. I was going to ask you whether you folks thought that the release of the recent UN crisis report helps, or whether people have become inured to, oh, that's just the latest, and it doesn't actually make people sit up and take notice. So my question is the UN crisis report helpful?
Well, in my opinion, it's extremely helpful. Of course, I haven't, it's 3,500 pages in full. So I've managed to get through the 42-page
Right.
summary for policymakers. I think it's helpful in a couple of important ways. Number one, it's the most recent science. So it advances what we know. And that most recent science affirms the level of urgency that had been expressed in previous reports, most recently in a 2018 report by the IPCC called Global Warming at 1.5 degrees. And that was the first report by the IPCC that insisted that we had to achieve a lower stabilization point of uh, warming of 1.5 degrees on average above the pre-industrial average temperature as opposed to the 2.0.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so in 2018, they really started sounding the alarm um, more insistently than they had prior. And this one, as of 2 weeks ago, is even more insistent. And so, either you say, well, we don't believe 98% of scientists working on the question, or you say we have to take urgent action. So I'm of the view that we should take what the climate scientists say seriously, and that therefore, when they say we have to reduce emissions by 50% as of 2030 or thereabouts 50%, we really have to do it. We can't just have beautiful speeches and nice resolutions and going on TV, and I'm including Democrats here as well as
Oh,
Republicans.
absolutely. And this whole notion of we'll have voluntary goals for something to change within the next 15 years. That's not the way you make changes in your real life, and it's not going to
No.
be the way we make changes about this.
And we can't say, okay, let's put it off for another year, another 2 years, another 3 years. That has been the pattern now for decades. And maybe 25 years ago, you could have said, okay, let's put it off because the science isn't all that settled and the level of urgency isn't as severe. But now we're well past the point. And so, really, having a program that is aggressive and capable of hitting the targets and is good for working people and their communities. That's what's critical. And so I was, to be able to contribute in a small way by writing this study, but to really follow the leadership of people like Dave Campbell and other labor leaders who have really stuck their necks out and have fought for this. It's really been an honor for me. And to me, it's the single most important project on the political scene right now.
Very good. Um,
Well,
yeah, go ahead, Dave.
I think Dr. Pollin is being much too modest. Without his contributions, I don't think we'd be here today. Um, and not just in California, but in multiple states and federal government too. But I think that the demand for an equitable transition for workers and their communities is the demand that can unite um, disparate unions and workers with those who are concerned about the environment and what's happening with climate change. And through that process of uniting, we can overcome, as I mentioned, that political hegemony of the existing powers that be, so to speak.
Mm.
So that's what the project that we're trying to get done. And without the theoretical work that Dr. Pollin has done, we wouldn't be here. I might say that, in my conversations with state legislature and in conversations to colleagues with state legislature, a number of them are very excited to see an actual plan to get it done.
I bet.
At the same time, at the same time, they ask questions. Okay, who's in this coalition? And
Mm.
it's very clear that they are looking for political support so that they don't get cattywampus. So their career doesn't end. It's not a career decision for them. But we're getting to the point where we have to, uh, for the sake of humanity, address this issue. If we don't, we're all doomed.
Yeah, I'm going to quote some things from the plan just to nail down some of the specifics. And then I want to shift to talking about the second half of the plan, which is the transition. What's in it for the workers and so on. But first, let me just lay out some of what I gather. These are quotes from the study. This study represents a recovery program for California, which I think is an interesting way of putting it, that will also build a durable foundation for an economically robust and ecologically sustainable longer term growth trajectory. And what I read that to say is that we've taken, as we took a hit after 2008 with the recession, we've taken a hit from the pandemic. We are going to need to generate a recovery, but let's make sure that that's recovery is at the same, is not just the status quo, is not just what went before the pandemic, but begins to lay this foundation for ecologically sustainable and economically robust. And the project that you propose is to build a clean energy infrastructure to replace the existing fossil fuel dominant infrastructure. It will dramatically raise energy efficiency standards. It will equally dramatically expand the supply of clean renewable energy supplies, including solar and wind, primarily with supplemental supplies from low emissions bioenergy, geothermal, small scale hydro. You've scaled the clean energy investment project at about $76 billion per year from 21 to 30. But as you pointed out, Robert, this is 2% of what we estimate will be the state's average GDP, which means you're making this transition and leaving 98% of the state's GDP to be spent, however people want. And so now let me go to something about the just or the fair transition. How do we make sure, and this is why I believe this alliance has come together, how do we make sure that people's lives aren't ruined by doing by the industries ending up doing the right thing?
Well, that is one of the two or three critical questions in the whole study, and we put a lot of attention on that. So let's deal with the realities. What we show in the study right now in California, there's about 112,000 people working in the fossil fuel industry or related industries. So, and on average, they're well paid. And of course, Dave can speak to this much better than I can, but I'm going from the available public statistics. They're well paid. On average, they're better paid than the people that would get jobs today in the renewable energy economy. We have to recognize these facts. These are facts. In terms of those 112,000 people, first of all, if we're going to cut emissions by 50% in 10 years, that doesn't mean that that we're not going to lose 112,000 jobs tomorrow. We will probably lose about 55,000 jobs, half of 112,000. We'll lose those over a decade. So that's going to be year to year 5,000 roughly 5,000 jobs lost per year that would wind down, whereas the clean energy investment program and the related program in infrastructure and renewable agriculture is going to generate about 1 million jobs. So 5,000 jobs on one side, 1 million jobs on the other side. In addition, of the roughly 5,000 jobs that are going to get lost, as you mentioned, and as we pay a lot of attention in the study, let's take round numbers. About 2,000 of them will be people who will voluntarily retire
Mm-hmm.
because they retirement age at 65 or over. So in the end, we're looking at about 3,000 people per year that are going to be displaced. And these people have good jobs on average. They're in communities, and we have to focus on getting these people another position at equal pay. We have to make sure their pensions are guaranteed. We have to make sure if they need training, retraining, they get it. And if they have to relocate for their new job, then we take care of that. It said I put a budget number there at $75,000 per relocation alone. So, generous transition policies for 3,000 workers per year in California is dead center as part of this project to save the planet. We've got to do it. It's got to be there. And yeah, it's going to be, in the range of $500 million a year in California for a generous program. That's a lot of money. But again, as we said at the outset, it's less than 2/100ths of 1%
I,
of California's GDP.
and I must say, when I first read that number, I had to go back and look again and see, is it really that,
Yeah,
that small relative to the size of our GDP? And
that's
for
right.
people to hear that, it's not 2%, it's 2/100ths of 1%.
Yeah, it's not 2% and it's not 2/10ths of 1%. That's why I wrote it out to say
Yeah.
2/100ths of 1%. It's minuscule. It's easy to do. It takes a minimal level of commitment to the working people of the state of California and their families and their communities. It must be done.
And I mean, this is kind of a schmaltzy thing to say, but certainly Southern California and an awful lot of California owes some of its original growth and original power and all to the fossil fuel industry. We were, I mean, you look at There Will Be Blood, the movie from a few
Hmm.
years ago, it starts in Signal Hill. You know, it the the uh, the fossil fuel industry was a key player in developing California to be the juggernaut that it is.
Yeah. And so, in particular, you mentioned that movie. Well, Kern County is where this all began in California, and we give special
That's right.
attention to a transition for Kern. So we say of the roughly $140 billion per year across all programs that would go for California, Kern County should get twice as much relative to its population as the rest of the state. And that's another feature of the transition.
Yep. And one of the things you also, which I'm not sure it was quite clear when you were saying it, Robert, was that uh, as I think I read it, it was like the average in the fossil fuel industry is at 130,000 a year, and the average in clean energy is something closer to 90 or 85 or something. In here,
Yeah.
there isn't just training. There isn't just there's actual subsidy for a few years to people who are going to lose that difference. Am I correct?
Yes. And that's correct. So we're saying, let's say you're making, let's say, $100,000 in your fossil fuel job, and you get transitioned to another job that's going to pay you $85,000. Well, then the transition program makes up that difference, the 15,000, so that people don't have to experience loss of income. That's critical. So I think the work that the union's leadership, people like Dave, um, are going to be advancing this in a way that is, I think, finally going to be understood by politicians who are great at making speeches, but are a lot less equipped to make serious commitments. But now is the time. We can't just have good speeches. We need commitments, and the commitments are going to come out of being the political pressure that emerges out of this labor environmental coalition led by people like Dave.
Dave, when you and I spoke offline, and I asked you about the membership, whether the membership is aligned or involved and so on in this, one of the things you said to me was that it doesn't necessarily matter to your members if they keep working in fossil fuels or even in energy. Can you talk to us a little bit more about the rank and file?
Well, I think that people who work in refineries, the starting wage is like $75,000 a year. And with overtime, it's very common to make at least $130,000 a year for being a high school graduate.
Mm.
Now, there's a lot of things we have to um, put up with. The job is like a fireman or policeman. You have to do work rotating shifts, which is tough on your body, tough on your family.
Mm-hmm.
And but a number of people who work in refineries had careers before they came to refineries, and some of them are graduates of USC. Some of them are former teachers, as archaeologists, as chemists. Uh, so I don't think that people are necessarily married to working in the fossil fuel industry. What they are interested in is doing something that they feel feel fulfilled in doing,
Mm-hmm.
and that supports them and their families. Their families supporting their kids and putting a roof over their head is the number one thing to them. And I think that if you paid them $130,000 a year to sweep floors, they would be sweeping floors. Um, it's the ability to support one's family, and that's the fear that we have to address. We have to overcome that fear of losing their livelihoods in order to be able to unite a disparate labor movement or a diverse labor movement rather, and the those who are concerned about climate change and other environmental aspects.
Okay, we've
So
got a couple of more minutes. One note I want to throw out there, by the way, is and you don't necessarily have to reply to it. I'm going to ask you each sort of to make kind of your closing pitch here. But what in researching for this, I did a little looking at where people stand around unions these days, and according to an article I read in the Guardian in mid-May, Americans are more pro-union and anti-big business than at any time in decades. That over half of Americans say they would vote for a union at work, while only 11% currently belong to one. And the difference between the share of workers who'd like to be in a union and those who are is wider than it's been in decades. So this possibility of a resurgence in unions is a hopeful thing, and especially since we've got to make this transition not just in this field but in throughout our economy. So let me,
Yeah.
Dave, you go first, and then Robert, you go next. Just kind of a closing 30 seconds to a minute.
yeah, I think that over the years, particularly over the past 50 years, the ability of people to form unions has been hampered. The corporations have gotten around a lot of the laws that existed 50 years ago, and today uh, it's an intimidating process to form a union. That's why we need a reform, which we're calling the PRO Act.
Yep.
Um, and That's an issue before Congress now. The reason that these declining, unsustainable industries pay more is those were industries that were uh, formed before or during that period 50 years ago, where they're highly unionized. The reason that the new industries in clean, sustainable production are not unionized is because they're new industries. So we need to change that underlying law in order to boost the wages and benefits that those industries pay.
That ties it together very, very well. Yes, I mean, when people look back at the golden age, the 50s, the 60s, when we had a strong middle class, there were strong unions, there were high taxes on the wealthy, and the political parties compromised with each other. Three things we could use again. Robert, final word.
I think what you and Dave just said is great. There's not a whole lot for me to add. Just to cite one example, in the 1950s, the President of the United States, Dwight Eisenhower, a Republican, went before the AFL-CIO giving a speech and said, anyone, and I can't get the exact quote right now, but he said, anyone who opposes unions, should have their head examined. Why should anyone be opposed to unions? Because they do so much good to advance the well-being of working people and the rest of society. So in my view, the union movement is critical to making a transition, a climate stabilization process viable. In the absence of strong support from the union movement, in my view, it's not going to happen. So not to put too much on people like Dave, but really, in a sense, the fate of the planet depends on getting working people and their families and their communities to recognize the need for a climate stabilization movement, but one that takes their concerns as of utmost importance.
Yeah, I will finish, and thank you, Robert. I will finish that by reading a quote I found in one of the articles, and I don't think it was you. I think it was a quote from you, Dave. I think it was from another oil worker. But he said, as an oil worker, you're standing on the track. You can see the train coming. We can argue about why the train is coming. We can argue about exactly when it's going to get here, but it's coming. The choice for us is, do we stand on the track and face whatever happens, or do we get up on the platform and try to catch that train going out of the station? And what both of you are saying is that it's going to take smart economists, it's going to take smart entrepreneurs, and it's going to take labor to the transition that the fires, the floods, etc., tell us is, and the science tells us is absolutely necessary. So again, the website is CaliforniaClimateJobsPlan.com. That's all one word, CaliforniaClimateJobsPlan.com. For this conversation and many other interviews and articles, and to join me in pursuit of a world that just might work, go to TerrenceMcNally.net, TerrenceMcNally.net, or aworldthatjustmightwork.com. They're the same website. If you want to receive my weekly email announcements of telling you who's going to be on, what we're going to talk about, and usually 8, 9, 10 articles to flesh out the conversation, email me at temcnally, TEMCNALLY, @mac.com. You can also subscribe and listen to the Freeform podcast on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and most other podcast sites. Thanks to George Vasilopoulos at Progressive Voices, and most of all you, my listeners. Please share this podcast widely. And finally, thank you, Robert POLLIN and Dave Campbell. Keep up your good work.